Hey guys, it's Neon, and I regret to inform you that Loot Crate is canceled. Loot Crate is done, it's over with. It filed for bankruptcy, it lays off workers, but it is promising to ship remaining boxes. Is this the end of the surprise box, the subscription box craze that we had for the last couple years? I think this might be game over for that, because Loot Crate was one of the first, certainly one of the most successful subscription box services, at least in the pop culture space, and we're done. We're over. So before we get into the video, please subscribe for more pop culture news, views, and rants here on Clownfish TV. We've grown tremendously in the last couple months. We thank you guys for that. We want to keep bringing you more content. And yeah, you know, we've actually done a couple of box openings here on the channel in the past, and I was surprised. I didn't know that Loot Crate was in the trouble it is in. But the bigger issue for me as a comic book fan, Loot Crate's being used to prop up comic book sales, to prop up ailing comic book sales, and sort of become the go-to for Marvel to go back and be like, look, we sold 1 million copies of Star Wars #1. But they sold 1 million copies of Star Wars #1 via Loot Crate. And Loot Crate also pushed out some, I think, Walking Dead comics and some other comics that I think artificially inflated the numbers of comics sold, because customers weren't actually getting a choice in getting these comics. They just sort of pushed them off onto them. But some of the Loot Crate comics are actually worth money. So I don't know. But here we go. Coming from Gizmodo, IO9. So that's interesting. They rebranded. IO9 doesn't have its own logo anymore. Interesting. I just noticed that. Okay, so Loot Crate files for bankruptcy and lays off workers, but promises to ship remaining boxes. Loot Crate was once the go-to company for monthly surprise shipments of geek and gamer gear. Yeah, it was basically all the junk that you would get at GameStop. But now its stock is run dry. The company is filing for bankruptcy and has laid off dozens of employees on top of the 150 warehouse workers who were let go last month. Again, I had no idea they were in trouble, but the last time we picked up a Loot Crate box was probably 2 years ago. So Loot Crate plans to ship all remaining boxes to customers, but given how behind it already is, it seems like a tough promise to keep. In a press release released overnight, Loot Crate announced plans to file for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. Reports of financial troubles have been circling for a while, including defaulting on a $21 million loan in 2017, even though Loot Crate has about 250,000 subs. The plan is to try and sell the company, with one of its investors, Money Chest, who will, I love the name, Money Chest, who will set the initial auction bid, funneling $10 million bankruptcy loan to keep operations afloat in the interim. The bankruptcy filing and overall financial woes have devastated the company's workforce. Last month, Loot Crate closed its warehouse and laid off 150 workers, announcing plans to outsource to a third-party logistics company. An additional 50 employees were laid off last week, leaving the company with just 60 full-time workers. Reports have since surfaced on Twitter that employees were let go without any severance or benefits, something that Toys R Us recently faced backlash for. And we actually have friends who worked at Toys R Us, and yeah, it was pretty crap what they did, resulting in a $20 million severance fund for 30,000 former employees. Co-founder Christopher Davis promised in the press release that Loot Crate subscribers should expect no changes. Daily operations will continue as usual. Unique and exciting fan items will be purchased. Crates will be shipped, and all aspects of the business will go on as before the Chapter 11 filing. Our employees will continue to be paid as usual during this transaction, he said. That's a pretty hard sell, but it hasn't been business as usual at Loot Crate. According to the bankruptcy filing, this is coming from the LA Times, the company has been withholding customer billing and still owes at least $20 million worth of shipments to customers. Some subscribers report not having received subscription boxes in the past 3 months. IO9's deputy editor, Jill Pantozzi, who receives a courtesy subscription for media, you need to disclose that, right, says the last shipment that arrived was the May Nemesis box. There have also been complaints of repeat items, lack of interesting exclusives. Well, when you don't have any money, you can't buy anything. And boxes filled with disappointing goods. Disappointing loot box. Fallout 4 fans may end up feeling especially frustrated if Loot Crate fails to fulfill all of its missing shipments. Folks who subscribe to the 6-part Fallout Series 2 set, which costs $228, in hopes of getting a complete Liberty Prime set, could end up never receiving its head. Oh, we don't want to go headless. Yeah, so this is just like, we're kind of watching the implosion of mainstream media cashing in on geeks, aren't we? I mean, this is really what's going on here. And it's ironic that I pulled up the IO9 article, and IO9 doesn't even have its own, masthead anymore. It doesn't even have its own logo because Gizmodo was sold for next to nothing. Univision unloaded it because it wasn't performing. And so now IO9 is just plain old Gizmodo. And they're talking about how Loot Crate isn't performing. We talked about how Tumblr got sold for next to nothing. We're talking about all of these pop culture media outlets sort of struggling to survive, and how the movie franchises aren't doing as well as they used to, and toys aren't selling as well as they used to. And we're sort of seeing, like, at least from my armchair perspective, we talked about GameStop too. God, GameStop, which basically trades in all this crap that they put in loot boxes. It's almost like Hollywood and the mainstream and the tech companies, they all wanted to cash in on geeks, push the old school geeks out, and now they're stuck. They're in this really hard place because, the mainstream has gotten tired of a lot of this stuff, I think. I mean, that's just an armchair opinion, but it seems like, the mainstreaming of pop culture is not going as well as these companies would have hoped, especially when you push out your core audience, and a lot of times, but I mean, as far as Loot Crate goes, like, yeah, I just think the novelty wore off. I had no idea they were in financial trouble, but I know there are like a cajillion monthly subscription boxes now, and they're just one of many. And this is kind of what, it comes down to, is like how much crap. I mean, it was a novelty at first. It was like, wow, I get this really cool stuff delivered every month, and now everybody's doing it, and there's only so much room that people have, and there's only so much money that people have. In fact, I went out and found this article from Ad Age last year talking about the subscription box market fighting fatigue because people are burnt out. And there for a while, it was like, I mean, hell, YouTube, so many YouTubers' channels were built on opening subscription boxes and surprise boxes and all of this, like, wow, what's in the box? We have no idea. And it doesn't really matter because it's just another box of crap. That most people, like, there might be a couple of good things in there, but I mean, is this stuff that you actually would pay for? A lot of stuff they ship you, would you actually pay for this stuff? If you were to go to a store and see it on the shelf, would you buy it? Because they're just sending you a box of crap, basically. Hell, they even have a deli box. Katz's Delicatessen in New York announced in May it's going to have its own pastrami subscription service. How the hell do you ship pastrami every month? How do you do that? I don't understand. You pack it with ice? I don't even understand. But everybody's doing subscription boxes. Some business models now are based, solely on subscription boxes. You look at a lot of these food boxes and razor boxes, and it's just, there's too many boxes. And again, would you buy this stuff normally? And how much room do you have for pop culture stuff? And if the stuff isn't any good, is it worth it? But where I want to go with this is I want to talk about Loot Crate in relation to comic books, because we do talk about comic books and comic book sales on this channel, and Loot Crate was propping up the comic book industry for a while, or was at least helping to prop up the comic book industry. It was giving Marvel especially numbers to crow about because they were shipping a bunch of comic books during Loot Crate's heyday. So going out and talking about the best-selling comic books of all time, and they talk about how Action Comics 1000 sold 500,000 copies, but that was like a big deal. That's like supposedly a huge win for the direct market. And I want to talk about how it's still kind of sad in the grand scheme of things. So Action Comics 1000 should have been a major hit. It sold 500,000 copies, which in today's market is relatively unheard of. Detective Comics 1000 did a little better than that. Now Marvel's trying to copy this with Marvel Comics 1000, which is complete bullshit because it's not actually Marvel Comics 1000. They're actually rolling it in with the Timely Comics era And, you know, I'm like, wait, did we miss a couple of years here? Because the modern Marvel universe started in the early 60s, and now all of a sudden we're at issue 1000. Yeah, this is bullshit. It's a bullshit marketing move made by Marvel because they need to justify their existence, I think, to Disney. But I digress. Spider-Man 583 sold 500,000 copies because it had Obama on the cover, so people are going to buy it for the novelty. I mean, a lot of people bought comics who normally don't buy comics for the gimmick, and they're going to go back and do this again, aren't they? With Spider-Man. They've got J.J. Abrams and his kid writing a Spider-Man series. So I don't expect 500,000 copies to be sold, but I think it'll do okay. Secret Wars. So we got Spider-Man #1, where they, you know, this is right after they undid Peter Parker's marriage, and that sucked, but it sold 500,000. Again, another Spider-Man #1. See a pattern here? See a pattern here? Spider-Man, Ultimate Spider-Man #1, which was actually pretty good. Batman 10-cent Adventure. It was dirt cheap. So of course they moved a lot of copies of it. They did this with The Walking Dead too. I think they had like a, what was it, 75-cent or 99-cent issue. Fantastic Four, 9 cents. Of course they sold a lot. So if you get, so look, here's my takeaway. 2002, 9 cents. Fantastic Four sold 700,000 copies. Star Wars #1. This is what, you know, CB Cebulski is talking about, this new million copy selling Marvel comic, and they don't think it's going to be Marvel Comics 1000. It better not be the J.J. Abrams Spider-Man #1, because it looks like they keep going back to that well. Spider-Man. They keep expecting that J.J. Abrams comic to sell 1 million copies, and I don't think it's going to. Maybe if they put it in Loot Crate. So Star Wars #1. You know, CB Cebulski talked, you know, boasted about how Star Wars #1 sold 1 million copies. Of course it did. Of course it did, because they dumped it into Loot Crate boxes during peak Loot Crate. Like at that time, Loot Crate probably had 500,000 or 1 million subs. I mean, it's definitely declined. It has 250,000 now, but 2015 was peak Loot Crate, and that's when they dropped Star Wars #1 into the Loot Crate boxes. Again, how do you get people to buy comic books now? You basically give them away. 9 cents, 10 cents, 9 cents, and not free, but they're already subscribing to it anyway. That'd be like being like, hey everybody who subscribes to Comcast Cable gets a free comic book. Hey look, we've got the highest selling comic book of all time. But it wasn't selling on its own merit. And Star Wars #1, I mean, the Star Wars comics at first sold pretty well consistently for Marvel. I mean, they were all selling 6 figures until people got tired of Star Wars, but they were doing really, really well. But again, this is like, you know, this is not really an accurate representation of how many people are deliberately picking up a copy of Star Wars #1. They dumped it in Loot Crate boxes, and guess what? Marvel? You're not going to be able to rely on Loot Crate anymore to push your comics. If you were going to do that with the J.J. Abrams Spider-Man, I don't know if it's going to work, because Loot Crate will be done. So, of course, the highest selling comic of all time was X-Men #1, Jim Lee's X-Men #1. I had like 5 or 6 different versions of this comic. I think I had all the single covers that made like this big panoramic shot of all the X-Men, and then I had like this super deluxe edition with the fold-out gatefold cover. I think I had a reprint version of it. That was my reading copy, because back then, you know, you bought these comics and they came in a bag with a card, and you weren't allowed to open the bag, because all those 90s comics, they were going to be worth millions of dollars, just like Amazing Fantasy was. So you weren't allowed to touch the comics. You had to leave them in their bag with their card, just like, you know, X-Force and everything else. So being a naive teenager, I think I was like 14 or 15 when this came out. I'm like, oh, I better leave my X-Men #1 in the bag, so I have to go buy a reading copy too. And that's what we did, because we were young and stupid. You know, we bought comics that were supposed to be valuable, thinking, well, if the 60s X-Men #1 is worth millions of dollars, and this one will be worth at least $500,000 someday, I'll be able to buy a house with my X-Men #1 Jim Lee comic book. So anyway, it sold 8 million copies. I'm surprised. Where is Spider-Man #1 from Todd McFarlane. Where is that on this list? Because I really think Todd McFarlane's Spider-Man #1, I think sold a couple of million copies, or at least 1 million copies. I'm really surprised it's on this list. Really surprised it's not here at all. I don't understand why it's not on this list. But yeah, 8 million copies of X-Men #1. That sounds like a lot, right? Especially talking about today's comic book industry. I want to show you something. This follows up on yesterday's video. Manga sales. How many copies of One Piece? Now, this is all the volumes. There's 93 volumes. But how many copies of One Piece have been sold? 454 million, like 500 million. Almost 500 million copies of One Piece. Now, granted, that is across multiple volumes. That makes Marvel's sales sad. I mean, that makes American comic sales sad. Even in the 90s, it kind of peak comic book industry. You look at the numbers, you know, here, and we're talking Japan, which is a much smaller country than America, and these ridiculous sales numbers. You know, I mean, I'm sorry, there's like nothing. Even the lowest selling thing here with, like, well, again, this is across multiple volumes, 24 volumes, 20 million. That means almost a million copies of Rookies, which I've never read. But almost a million each issue, each volume. And we're like crowing about selling 500,000. You know, and they do that with the graphic novels too, with like Ms. Marvel. They're like, Ms. Marvel sold almost 500,000 copies of the graphic novel across, you know, multiple volumes and different sales channels that we can't really track, and you just have to take our word for it. So, you know, it's gonna be interesting to see with the decline of Loot Crate, how long, you know, Marvel is going to be able to last without, you know, hitting 1 million copies again. I don't think any publisher is ever going to hit 1 million copies, legitimately 1 million copies sold, because the direct market's not big enough to support a comic that sells 1 million copies. But very interesting to see that, yeah, all this is imploding now. It's all imploding. So it doesn't surprise me. Again, there's just too much of this kind of crap out there, and a lot of people just looking to make a quick buck off of pop culture, off of geeks like us. You know, they're trying, and it's starting to backfire, I think. So please leave a comment. Let us know your thoughts on Loot Crate. Did you like Loot Crate? When was the last time you ordered a Loot Crate? Like I said, for us, I think it's been like 2 years. It's been like 2 years. So I think a lot of people got burnt out after a couple of years. And let us know. And please subscribe for more pop culture news, views, and rants here on Clownfish TV. This has been Neon. We'll talk later. Hey guys, thanks for watching Clownfish TV. Please consider supporting the channel. Go to clownfishsupport.com. That's clownfishsupport.com. And if you want to join our community, go to clownfishtalk.com. That's clownfishtalk.com. Please subscribe, ring the bell for notifications. We will talk to you next time.